I wrote a book about my life named Moguldom. You can get more information about this book at moguldombook.com. I talk about acquiring a knowledge of self, self-determination, and building a business over 10 years. There are some gems in this book that you don't want to miss. One way to support the Go movement in this podcast is to go to moguldombook.com, buy the book on pre-sale to support the Go movement. Let's go. You're listening to Go with Jamarlin Martin. We have a go hard or go home approach as we talk to the leading tech leaders, politicians, and influencers. Let's go. This is part 3 of my interview with Howard Franklin. Be sure to check out part 1 and 2 on previous episodes. Another trick. I want the politician to do something for me. The politician has plans to either increase the wealth of their private foundation, for example, the Clinton Foundation, where the donors, they can give to the foundation. Ooh, I want to help people. But the donors are looking for something. I may give 10 million. I may give 20 million. I may give 50, 100 million. But I'm not just trying to help people. I got to play this swamp game at a high level. And so donors to the Clinton Foundation, donors, a lot of Silicon Valley money went into the Obama Foundation. Okay? I'm not suggesting that there's a lot of conflicts, or the conflicts with the Clinton Foundation is connected to the conflicts or swampy activity, potential swampy activity with the Obama Foundation. I'm not saying that, but a lot of the Obama donors, a lot of corporate folks that were writing for Obama, they donated to his foundation. And let me just say, I think Obama's intentions with the foundation in terms of helping, particularly Black America, I think they're pure. I think he has good intentions. But do you think that there needs to be kind of stronger laws where, hey, I'm going to kick it with Google and I'm not going to do any regulations for Google and Facebook. I get out of office, Google and Facebook are going to give my foundation $100 million. What can you do about that? Or can you not do something like that? Because there's no transaction, there's no paper trail. It's kind of, hey, it's just an understanding. It's how the game is played.
I think I would start from a different place in that transaction. When President Obama or President Bush or President Clinton or now President Trump is in office and is not being responsive to calls for regulation, now is the time to have the conversation, right? After this person has transitioned to a post-presidency and now can live out the rest of his or her days in a much different space, I don't know that you have, again, nearly as much leverage in this conversation. So, I don't know that I don't have a regulatory framework that I would propose this moment, but I would say if you're concerned about those issues, the place to do it is with the Congress we have today and the White House we have today.
You do believe there's room for improvement in terms of
Absolutely.
integrity. There's a lot of room for improvement. And, well, of course, we talked about Ferguson his brother hiding cash in his freezer.
Jefferson,
swampy activity. What was his first name?
Was it William? It wasn't.
I think it was William.
Yeah,
Jefferson.
William Jefferson. Yeah.
William Jefferson. But Cory Booker, if Google is investing in your private company while you're a politician and you start the startup and you sell it and you have the chief of Google investing in your startup, hey, we know that America's a very corrupt place. But he's allowed to do stuff like that.
So you're advocating for rules that wouldn't allow people who serve at the highest level to take investment or do business.
Well, I think the first step is the voter has a lot of power, right? If we can dilute the influence of the swamp, that the voter could just vote these people who are doing these questionable things. Don't vote for them or vote them out. And the voter needs to be informed.
I totally agree.
About how the rules of the monopoly game.
And a lot of the people that you've name checked or on a ballot, next year, right? We'll have an opportunity to say, hey, your political career goes forward, you pass go, or stops here today, right? I think that's going to happen for a lot of politicians.
Do you agree with when that black agenda, that serious, cohesive black agenda is ready to go, that the black agenda is better off if you made significant strides with how the swamp works? Meaning that if you try to get good stuff through a elevated swamp environment, that, hey, maybe it's better that you knock down a lot of these swamp norms and how the swamp works, and the people become more educated. When that black agenda is time to go through the system, it's not gonna be diluted.
So let me level set here, because I feel like maybe you heard me say something earlier and it may be different than what I wanted to come across. I agree.
So you agree with that?
I agree that we should be trying to figure out ways to make influence and money less pervasive in our politics. And frankly, as someone who is in the influence business, it actually would be better for me so that I don't have to come to clients and say, listen, we've got a better idea, but this guy paid some money. Or we've got a better piece of legislation, but this guy's plugged in.
Do you agree with this simple kind of framework for our people? If the lobbying value in the United States goes down, the black numbers, the way we vote cohesively in terms of 90% voting for the Democratic Party, meaning that we're voting together, which could be powerful, that if the lobbying value goes down in the United States, black voter equity goes up, meaning your vote is going to count a lot more. It's going to be more powerful if this other stuff is reduced.
I enjoy a good hypothetical question as much as anybody, but if you're watching what's happening in state houses, city halls, at the federal level, in Congress and the White House, the reach, the ability, the largesse that lobbyists have to deploy in the system is not shrinking, it's growing, right? So if somehow we could fiat that the business of influence were to shrink and would reverse the trend lines that we've seen the last 10, 15, 20 years, then I think this is a worthwhile conversation. In the absence of that reality, I think we got to figure out how to be more impactful in the one that we're already sitting in, right? My clients aren't going to pay me to say, hey, if we lived in an alternate universe, I could have gotten this bill passed. They're going to say, well, what can you do today in this universe, in this reality? And that's kind of the plane I'm trying to have this conversation on. The business of influence is not shrinking. It's not going away. I think we need to figure out how to engage with it. And thank goodness.
But it's being attacked where folks like folks like Bernie Sanders, I believe they have led the charge where now you're seeing other folks like Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, they say, hey, we don't want any corporate PAC money. So I'm just saying that there's things moving.
No meaningful. So what I think you've already laid out the avenue for those dollars to find their way into those campaigns in other ways, other means. That means
you're just saying that, hey, we swamp money. You're saying, hey, look, I know about the swamp. That swamp money getting in there.
It's going to find a way.
It's going to find a way.
It's going to find a way. I don't want to turn the blind eye to it. I would rather we say more important than any dollar you could collect is a vote, right? We had the SEC primary 4 years ago. We had all these southeastern states lined up casting their ballots for our president. And if we speak with a collective voice, it's going to mean much more than any dollar amount could ever amount to for any politician. Money's only out there to buy the votes. If people say my vote's not for sale, I'm actually educated on the issues and the candidates, and here's how I'm voting my conscience. All the money in the world won't change the outcome. People, let me just say, I mentioned at the outset of this interview, I spent the first dozen years of my career running campaigns, and plenty of those campaigns we got outworked, we got outraised on, right? People raised more money than us and then still fell to the sword when it was time to count the votes on election day. It's not strictly a matter of dollars and cents. It's certainly it's important, right? And I wouldn't acknowledge that if we didn't raise any money, we would have still won. But I think we got to acknowledge there are ways to beat back the influence of money in politics.
Are you familiar with the name Sherry Bustos?
She's a daughter of a president, I believe.
Sherry Bustos is the chairwoman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign
Okay, so
Committee.
no, I was not familiar.
Okay, are you aware of the beef that has broken out in the Democratic Party where
Several
the,
beefs.
where the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, they have said that if you're a vendor who works with someone who's challenging one of our people who are already in power, we're going to, I don't like to use blacklist, we're going to whitelist you. They're saying that we don't want another AOC. We don't want some of these young people to challenge some of these people who've been eating chitlin fries for 20 years or 30 years, not shaking things up. They're part of the establishment. They're comfortable. But the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee is saying that if there's a Democratic candidate that runs against someone who's already in office, we're going to whitelist you.
So
hold on. Let me just finish. So there was a report last week that the Congressional Black Caucus is not. It's not a surprise. They're on the side of Sherry Bustos and the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee in terms of this rule that we don't want anybody running against our people in 2020. What do you think about the Congressional Black Caucus siding with the establishment?
This is not where I'd like to see them. But I'll put in some context. You know, DCCC gets behind 10 or 12 hyper-competitive races every cycle, right? We have 435 members in Congress. Each of them is up every 2 years. 10 or 12 of them will be hotly contested, flipping back and forth between Republican and Democrat. And that's where I've worked on dozens of races. I have never worked along the DCCC. I've worked on races, and when I say worked alongside, worked directly with. And I think this is another acknowledgement of where our politics is going. I would acknowledge that so much of this is certainly problematic, right? I think part of the issue too we talk about this all the time, Atlanta being the home of the civil rights movement. We got plenty of elder statesmen in politics who've been around for a very long time, who need to make room for new blood, new ideas, and new leadership, right? I think I think most people who are bumping around in politics, at least in my generation, feel that way. But there's still only one way to send them home, and that's to beat them at the ballot box. But I'm with you. I don't like that the CBC would take this stance. But does
that sound like the CBC is playing in the swamp?
I think they're protecting their own, right? Their membership is going to be older black members of Congress who came in when reapportionment and the Voting Rights Act allowed for seats that would allow black and brown people to be elected to Congress. Many of them have served 10, 20, 30 years, right?
Yeah.
It's incumbent protection, and everybody does it.
And this is not a black thing or a race thing, but let me say this, that in Africa, you've had leaders rob the people like Sani Abacha in Nigeria. Over and over again, you have leaders that do not want to give up power. They would prefer the people to shed blood or the country goes bankrupt, and they want to stay in power until they die, including Mugabe. Okay, so there's people who are drunk on power, and if the people are better off with someone else, they don't care. If the people are better off with a different vision, a younger, fresh vision, they don't care. But in these African countries, they want to stay on power. It's more about them than the people. Hold on. And I'm saying that the Congressional Black Caucus, it may look different, but you have people where it's clear that there's better leadership, there's fresher leadership, new ideas.
Sure.
who want to present the people with a different vision, and they want to stop them. They don't even want them to run.
Well, let me just say, I'm not ready to compare, autocratic dictators in developing and third world countries to black politicians in Congress who have largely been out of power and out of favor. Being a member of the minority looks great. You're still on television. You got some perks. Maybe you get to go on MSNBC or Fox or CNN, but it's not like being the president of a country where you don't even have to abide by the rule of democracy, right? These people still have to win elections. At the end of the day, they still got to win elections. And plenty of incumbent politicians, even at the congressional level, have lost elections to young upstarts, not just AOC. Ayanna Pressley knocked off a 10-year or 10-term incumbent and Mike Capuano this past year as well. And plenty of folks in the Democratic establishment, myself included, were excited about her leadership, met her and supported her financially and otherwise. So yes, that's a bad example, and we shouldn't be encouraging it, but it's not preventing turnover in leadership. We've had, this is, as you, I'm
But
sure,
it-
no
it's-
doubt
it's
have
a-
heard,
it's a-
youngest and most diverse Congress in the history of this August body.
But it's a swampy practice. Does it sound
This
swampy?
is a
to you?
swampy practice. I mean,
Okay.
I
Man,
don't.
you got somebody who's in the swamp saying that the Congressional Black Caucus
That's a swampy
that's
practice.
a swampy practice. And how could someone? And first is that the mothership, they're answering to a white woman named Sherry Bustos.
Are you sure she's white?
Yes.
Okay.
The pictures.
Okay.
I'm assuming she's white. She's also another one of your multimillionaires. That's
90% of Congress is millionaires, man. It's hard to single out the few that happen to be Democrats and the millionaires.
another thing on the CBC. So you have some people in the black community, they give Biden a hard time because he advocated for the Clinton crime bill, mass incarceration.
Sure.
Biden banged for that. It's hard for me to criticize Biden and these white politicians who supported the crime bill when I know, when my research says the CBC was advocating for this. My research says Charles Rangel was one of the leaders who brokered that mass incarceration deal. So if white folks in government, in power, if they say, hey, I got to listen to you guys, I got to listen to these people who are closer to community. But if our leaders are going to go to D.C. and say we want mass incarceration or we're willing to support mass incarceration, and they don't realize that this is very short-term thinking, that it sounds good, but you're talking about a big beast, and based on how the system is designed and structured, your people are going to be worse off, meaning that our leaders may not even have the vision.
Again, this comes back to this lack of a black agenda. I agree with what you're saying.
Okay, so do you agree that before we go at Biden and say, man, Biden was for mass incarceration, I can't vote for him, shouldn't we hold our own leaders accountable who voted for mass incarceration, who told some of these other leaders, yes, this would be good.
Charlie Rangel's no longer in the Congress. Biden's going to be on a ballot.
The establishment.
Sure.
Some of these,
So I'm agreeing with so much of the why that has driven your advocacy and your passion around these issues. The question I got to ask as an operator is how. Right? Like, I hear exactly what you're saying. I know how to hold someone like Joe Biden accountable, because if he does decide he wants to declare his rate or his candidacy for president, then he's got to come through all 50 United States. But if someone like Charlie Rangel up in Harlem, obviously, who's no longer in the House, made a decision that I don't agree with, I don't really have.
The institution he would bang for, the Congressional Black Caucus.
And just to be clear, you and I aren't funding the Congressional Black Caucus. The same organizations that you got on your soapbox about earlier, saying, hey, these guys are they're spending all this time and this money propping folks up. They're helping these presidential candidates or these prophetic black leaders. These are the same organizations writing max checks and donations to. Not just APEC,
but APEC's writing that check.
Yeah,
but
they're doing it across the aisle, right? But my point is, the way this works is, I'm just asking, what's the lever you would pull to hold these folks accountable, right? Like beyond talking about them, New York is 1,000 miles away from where I live. I don't have any standing to vote in that congressional seat, right? And whether or not I give my money to this organization or that one is not going to change one iota.
Well, that's what I'm saying. When the black agenda is organized and crafted, okay, a cohesive agenda that has a big tent that brings a lot of people in, it needs to have an element. It's obvious. Hey, we're going to bang against America. We're going to bang against white folks. We're going to bang against white supremacy. That needs to be in the black agenda.
Sure.
But also in the black agenda, we have to hold ourselves and leaders accountable that because the system is rigged or, white folks have done this and they've done that, self-accountability is a critical piece of the black agenda.
Exactly what I've been saying this entire time.
That, hey, if our politicians are going to go out there and crip walk for mass incarceration, are our politicians going to go out there and be hoodwinked and vote for the Iraq war? There has to be accountability for the people that we send to D.C.
Absolutely. I'm in total agreement with you, and I think that's the thread that's connected my comments here. I think it's great to look outwardly and to say, here are things wrong with the system. But if we can't even, after 50 years of a CBC and plenty of other organizations, I don't want to just put it at their feet. We got urban leagues and NAACPs and national caucus of state black legislatures and plenty of other organizations that have organizational heft, that have institutional knowledge, that have relationships to power, and have insights into our problems. And if we haven't come up with a cohesive agenda yet, I take issue. I can't point my finger at those guys, taking advantage of our lack of organization and our lack of discipline first. I got to say, are we doing what we're supposed to do? And then after that, and if we have, and we're still running into brick walls, if we're still being outspent and out-organized and out-fundraised, if our voices are still being drowned out, then it's a conversation we need to have about how we address this swamp. And this is not an either or, by the way. I think it's certainly important. But I have a tough time thinking about all the things that we aren't doing and worrying about what other folks are doing in the absence of our action.
Where does reparations land in your black agenda and how you think about what folks should be focused on? Or do you even support HR 40 and reparations?
I support the idea. I think a lot of folks a lot of leaders, whether they are thought leaders, whether they're political leaders, whether they're revolutionary leaders, have talked about how we might do this. And I think the biggest issue isn't a question of if we should or why we should, it's how we could, such that this government wouldn't, fall down under its own weight, right? Like I don't think this is a question of whether or not this country owes a debt or whether or not it should be repaying it. I think that the challenge is, with all of the complexities in governance today, that you got to be careful about pursuing something meant to uplift one group of people if you can show that it might harm another. And I think that's really the stumbling block that we've run into.
That's where the study of reparations, meaning I believe in a process.
Absolutely.
So one is America needs to commission a credible study. And this is where you don't want your black swamp people being on the council who would be studying this issue, meaning in terms of these people.
I would hope an issue like this would supersede whatever.
Yeah, so one is the study of reparations is not just for white America to understand what happened. The study of reparations is most of us don't understand the trauma, the psychological and cultural after effects of slavery.
Absolutely.
And what was done. For reparations to work, the black man and woman here in the United States, first, we need to understand. A lot of us have not studied what really happened. And we can't quantify, hey, what happens when you take a person's name and they don't have a country that they can connect with. They can't reference anything. And you just cut that off. and they just have to kind of just figure things out. What happens when you systemically rape a lot of the slaves, in terms of how can that kind of be an impairment on their thinking going forward, or their ability to function normally. And so a lot of our people don't even understand that a lot of these pathologies are connected to slavery. And so there's an economic component, obviously, but another piece I think that's lacking is we got to understand what was done to us and how that has impacted our culture, in terms of Shitty Cuz, who was the killer of Nipsey. And a lot of this violence that we see in our streets, even in terms of the self-hate.
I totally agree. Let me just say this, though. Congress didn't come to the SCLC or NAACP and say, hey, guys, we think it's unfair that our laws don't allow African Americans and women the right to vote, right? Outside agitators had to go make noise, perform demonstrations, shame elected leaders into coming around, and then still had to have sharp elbow negotiations to get what was owed to people who built this country. I don't imagine reparations to be much different. Why shouldn't we have, in a country with more than 100 HBCUs and plenty of other PWIs, an academic approach to this that isn't or doesn't have to be greenlit by Congress or by a president? Well, we could come back to those leaders and say, listen, we have performed academic studies that have now plumbed the depths and the horrors of what you put our ancestors through. Here is what we think it's worth. Here is how you have to come correct. Here's what we expect going forward, right? My only concern is that if we're waiting for elected officials to take on an issue that is proven to be a lightning rod in a divided House where the Senate's controlled by Republicans, House controlled by Democrats. I don't know who's controlling the White House these days. We're not going to see it happen, right? So much of this is self-determination. I'm not saying the responsibility fully is ours. I'm just saying if you acknowledge that you're not going to give me what I'm owed, then I've got to come knock on your door and demand it. And I can't do that while waiting for a handful of black leaders who make up the CBC or any other institution to wrestle the agenda from the majority parties and to send it in my direction.
Would you say that the fact that reparations is gaining popularity as an issue in Black America, and I give the ADOS movement a lot of credit in terms of building on the prior work on reparations of others and using social media to organize and educate folks. Although I don't agree with everything that ADOS is saying, I credit them with increasing the visibility and popularity of that issue. But would you say that the fact that Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Cory Booker now, Nancy Pelosi supporting H.R. 40, the study of reparations, that reparations coming at this day and hour as becoming a Democratic Party issue, at least starting with the study of it, that's reflective that there's nothing left in the tank in terms of the Democratic Party and black people, meaning that we've seen what the black politician can do. Right? You got a lot of credit, like Obama's black. A lot of these black politicians, they're black, great, Democratic Party, this, that. But the old stuff does not work for us. These little tricks that the establishment have used to get us. Hey, we'll go to the churches around election time. We'll bring Jay-Z out. We'll do this. We'll do that. We'll run a black candidate. Look how sharp he is. A lot of the stuff that has flowed through the system in terms of strategy with the Democratic Party and some of their advisors like Mark Penn and the stuff, all the darts and weapons, the black people have seen all that stuff. And right, Baltimore still looks the way it is, right? The people are still not satisfied. Right. And so hold on. So you need something more potent. And we saw a little bit of this with HRC.
I read it differently than you do. I think we have a clown car of a Democratic presidential primary. We have almost 24 candidates jockeying for airtime, for visibility, and to stake out the opportunity to be the party standard bearer from the left. And so I think there are going to be a lot of ideas that get consideration because we're just in the silly season. So I'm not disagreeing that there might be oxygen for this discussion, but I think a lot of that oxygen is part and parcel of the presidential race. If we didn't have prominent politicians from all across the country declaring their candidacies for president, I don't think we'd be talking about this. Somebody would be, but it wouldn't be the echo chamber that we're hearing right now.
Well, what I would say, I've been involved with politics probably since I was 16. And I think Black America is at a point where the inequality, the wealth gap, the stuff that we see, the racism, the white supremacy, the way that other groups have a mastery of technology and corruption, and that leaves us at a disadvantage, as we saw with the emissions corruption, where the guy in Newport Beach has clients all over America and he's cheating and helping their kids get into the best schools. So we know that this type of stuff is systemic, right? And so if the white supremacy and discrimination is systemic and it's not going away anytime soon, I think people are smartening up, particularly the younger generation, is that I cannot give that Democratic Party 90% credit every election, and this stuff is not moving. And so I get about all this stuff. Oh, Trump might win if you put reparations on the thing, and white folks may not vote Democratic, so we can't push reparations, this and that. But I believe that the black voter, when you go into that booth, you need to be thinking about the hood. You need to be thinking about people who have a lower lot than you. How would they be voting? How much patience do the people in the ghettos across the country, how much patience do we have? And so I believe that there's a sense of urgency where you're going to have to get more for that vote. I'm not saying that go to a reparations or bust strategy in this election, but reparations hurting white Democrats and white folks and other groups. Fuck that. I'm not all these policies.
Well, let me just say.
Hold on, let me just finish. All these policies, a lot of them are someone's getting hurt. And I'm not saying that we're looking to go out and hurt people, but America has committed a war crime against their people. And so the whole thing is coming down. I think the whole thing is coming down anyway. But if America wants to have a chance to heal, to even go on a path of healing, if it wants to possibly save herself in terms of the racial issues in the country, it's going to have to go through taking that medicine, because the country needs to revisit what happened to our people in slavery. It's not comparable to any group. The Frankensteinization of black people in America, it's not comparable to any group. But the people need to understand what happened to us, including us. Go ahead.
Yeah, I agree with most of what you said. I think one place we diverge, I don't think it's up to millennials or young people to vote in place of downtrodden black and brown people across this country, right? I think those people, all of us, need to do the same thing collectively, which is to vote for our economic futures, right? What we believe the agenda should include. And when politicians and leaders present themselves and the ideas that resonate with us, we ought to find ways to support them. We shouldn't say, the college educated version of me or the guy who, got out of this neighborhood is going to cast that vote for me. The beauty of the American political system is one man, one vote. And I think one other thing you got to be acknowledging, you got to be cognizant of, is that we're moving toward a majority minority society. We're not there yet, obviously. But I think the closer we get to it, the easier it'll be to have some of these conversations. Again, my suggestion is not that we should be waiting.
I disagree with that.
Okay, tell me more.
So when you say, and here is where I deviate with the black consensus, a lot of folks will say, hey, once this country becomes majority non-white, things are going to get better, right? Things are going to get better. Hold on. Let me just say, I'm telling you that I don't care if the country flips to majority non-white. A lot of our people, whether consciously or subconsciously, believe in white supremacy. Okay? A lot of the brown man and woman, they believe in white supremacy. The system is still in place. You can put a black face. You could put a brown face. You could put a woman. You can change these things in terms of what's on the outside. But we need to be looking at the institutions changing. And that all because something is non-white, or all because something is brown or black or female, that has an impact on the institutional beast that we're dealing with.
I agree with you. It's not all about the color or the gender of the person. I think we
But I'm saying in terms of the demographic shift, I just think that's overplayed in my view.
So I think we can find a happy medium here. I'm not saying that the moment we go majority minority, all the problems are solved, all the black and brown folks lock arms and they enact this agenda that we ought, or that we believe ought to come to fruition. But I do think that part of what you've acknowledged is some of this is a game of sheer numbers, right? And if you've got people who will be diligent in their study about who they should be supporting, who are educated about the issues that they want to see addressed, then you'll get that electorate will get you leaders who won't sell their souls to moneyed interests, who will vote their conscience when the time comes for it, and who will strike meaningful bargains that still move the country forward. I gotta believe that some degree of balance will be helpful to where we're headed. And I think it's going to address a lot of things. I think, you acknowledge, and I think there's some truth in this. You talked about the Democratic Party being able to rely on 90+% of black voters casting a lot with this party. I think that you get to a place where you've got again, a melting pot of minorities and women and young people, millennials or now Generation Z, what have you. I think it's gonna reset the boundaries of what we expect from our parties and what we think is possible. Hell, we might get a third party or another organization that's more responsive to what we've been asking for the last 50 or 60 years.
I want to thank Howard Franklin for coming on the show. Where can people check you out online?
On social, I'm at I Run Campaigns, so at I Run Campaigns with an S. And our company website is OhioRiverSouth.com.
Great conversation. This is one of the longest episodes out of 50. I enjoyed the conversation, and you'll definitely be back.
Thank you.
Hopefully.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to Go. You can check me out at Jamarlin Martin on Twitter, and also come check us out at Moguldom.com. That's MOGULDOM.com. Be sure to subscribe to our daily newsletter. You can get the latest information on crypto, tech, economic empowerment, and politics. Let's go.